USS Enterprise, CV-6, the ship that refused to die. Hello, and welcome to the channel. Before we begin, take a moment to support this video. If you enjoy deep, fact-based historical stories about World War II, legendary warships, and the men who served aboard them, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Your support helps this content reach more people who appreciate real history. Today, we are telling the story of one of the most famous warships ever built by the United States Navy. A ship that fought from the very first months of America's involvement in World War II until the final battles of the Pacific. A ship that survived relentless attacks, overwhelming odds, and constant danger. A ship that earned more battle honors than any other U.S. warship of the Second World War. This is the true story of USS Enterprise CV-6, known to her crew and to history as the Big E. USS Enterprise was not just a warship, she was a symbol. For millions of Americans during World War II, hearing that Enterprise was still afloat meant hope. When other ships were sunk, damaged, or lost, Enterprise continued to return to battle. Time and again, Japanese forces believed they had finally destroyed her. And time and again, she appeared again on the horizon, launching aircraft, striking back. But before she became a legend, Enterprise was simply steel, machinery, and human ambition. The keel of USS Enterprise was laid down on July 16, 1934, at the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Virginia. She was the second Yorktown-class aircraft carrier built for the United States Navy, following USS Yorktown, CV-5. At the time, aircraft carriers were still a relatively new concept. Many naval officers around the world continued to believe that battleships, massive vessels armed with heavy guns, would decide future wars. But a growing group within the U.S. Navy believed that air power at sea would change naval warfare forever. Enterprise was designed to be fast, flexible, and deadly. She was launched on October 3, 1936, and officially commissioned into the United States Navy on May 12, 1938. In terms of size and capability, USS Enterprise was among the most advanced warships of her era. She displaced approximately 25,500 tons at standard load and over 32,000 tons fully loaded. Her overall length was 809 feet, with a beam of 83 feet at the waterline, expanding to over 109 feet across the flight deck. Enterprise was powered by 9 Babcock and Wilcox boilers, feeding steam to 4 Parsons-geared turbines, driving 4 propeller shafts. This machinery produced approximately 120,000 shaft horsepower, allowing the carrier to reach speeds of over 32 knots. Speed was essential. It allowed Enterprise to maneuver with her task force, evade enemy attacks, and launch or recover aircraft efficiently. Her primary weapon was not her guns, it was her aircraft. At the start of the war, Enterprise typically carried around 90 aircraft, including F-4F Wildcat fighters, SBD Dauntless dive bombers, TBD Devastator torpedo bombers. These aircraft gave Enterprise the ability to strike targets hundreds of miles away, something no battleship could do. For self-defense, Enterprise was equipped with a combination of 5-inch dual-purpose guns, 1.1-inch Chicago piano anti-aircraft guns, later supplemented by 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikon cannons. As the war progressed and air threats increased, her anti-aircraft armament was continuously upgraded. In the years before World War II, USS Enterprise operated primarily in the Pacific. She participated in fleet exercises, training missions, and diplomatic port visits. These peacetime operations helped refine carrier tactics and trained the pilots and crews who would later fight in combat. By 1941, tensions between the United States and Japan were escalating rapidly. Enterprise was assigned to Aircraft Scouting Force Pacific Fleet, operating out of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and then came December. On December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. USS Enterprise was not in port that morning. She had been tasked with delivering Marine Corps aircraft to Wake Island, a small American outpost in the Western Pacific. On her return voyage to Hawaii, she was scheduled to arrive at Pearl Harbor on December 7th. Bad weather delayed her arrival. That delay likely saved the ship from destruction. Early on the morning of December 7th, Enterprise launched several of her aircraft ahead of the carrier to fly to Pearl Harbor. These planes arrived during or shortly after the Japanese attack. Some Enterprise pilots were among the first American aviators to encounter Japanese aircraft in combat. Several were shot down, not by the enemy, but by confused American anti-aircraft fire as defenses scrambled to respond. When news of the attack reached Enterprise, the ship immediately went to full combat readiness. Japanese submarines were believed to be operating in the area. Enterprise aircraft conducted anti-submarine patrols, and on December 10, 1941, Enterprise aircraft sank Japanese submarine I-70, marking one of the first American naval victories of the war. In the dark days following Pearl Harbor, the United States Navy was reeling. Battleships lay sunk or damaged. The Pacific Fleet had lost much of its surface-striking power. Only the aircraft carriers remained as offensive weapons. USS Enterprise became one of the most critical assets in the entire U.S. Navy. In December 1941, Enterprise was ordered to support efforts to relieve Wake Island, which was under attack by Japanese forces. Despite fierce resistance by the island's defenders, American relief efforts failed. Wake Island fell to Japan on December 23, 1941. Enterprise did not engage directly in the battle, but the mission highlighted the challenges the U.S. Navy faced: long distances, limited intelligence, and a powerful enemy already on the offensive. In early 1942, Enterprise took part in a series of hit-and-run raids against Japanese-held islands in the Marshall and Gilbert Islands. These raids had limited strategic impact, but they were enormously important psychologically. They demonstrated that the U.S. Navy could still strike back. American pilots and crews were gaining combat experience. Japanese defenses were not invulnerable. Enterprise aircraft attacked enemy airfields, ships, and installations, often facing heavy anti-aircraft fire. Each mission sharpened the carrier's combat readiness. In April 1942, Enterprise played a critical but often overlooked role in one of the most famous raids of the war, the Doolittle Raid. 16 U.S. Army B-25 bombers, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, were launched from the carrier USS Hornet to strike targets in Japan itself. Enterprise's task was to provide fighter cover and protection for the task force. On April 18, 1942, the task force was detected by a Japanese picket boat earlier than expected. As a result, the bombers were launched prematurely, far from Japan. Despite this, the raid succeeded in striking Tokyo and other cities. Although the physical damage was limited, the psychological impact was enormous. For the first time, Japan had been bombed. Enterprise's role in escorting and protecting the task force was essential to the mission's success. By mid-1942, the war in the Pacific was approaching a turning point. Japanese forces were advancing rapidly across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. But U.S. intelligence had begun to break Japanese naval codes. American commanders knew that a major Japanese operation was coming. The target was Midway Island. USS Enterprise was about to take part in one of the most decisive naval battles in history. At this moment, Enterprise had already survived the opening shock of Pearl Harbor, conducted some of the first American offensive operations of the war, helped strike Japan itself, proven the value of aircraft carriers in modern warfare. But her greatest trials and her most legendary battles were still ahead. The Battle of Midway would test Enterprise and her crew like never before, and the outcome would change the course of the war in the Pacific. By late May of 1942, the Pacific War had reached a critical moment. Japan's early victories had been stunning. Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, Singapore. But behind the scenes, the balance was beginning to shift. American cryptanalysts had broken key elements of the Japanese naval code known as JN-25. From intercepted messages, U.S. Navy intelligence determined that the Japanese were planning a major operation against a location referred to as AF. Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team at Station Hypo in Hawaii confirmed that AF was Midway Island. The Japanese plan was ambitious and dangerous. They intended to lure what remained of the U.S. Pacific Fleet into a decisive battle and destroy it. What they did not know was that the Americans were waiting. USS Enterprise, under the command of Captain George D. Murray, was assigned to Task Force 16, along with USS Hornet. USS Yorktown, hastily repaired after the Battle of the Coral Sea, would join them as part of Task Force 17. Together, these three carriers represented nearly the entire operational carrier strength of the United States Navy in the Pacific. Against them stood four Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. These were the same carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor. On June 4, 1942, the Battle of Midway began. Early that morning, Japanese aircraft struck Midway Island. At the same time, American carriers launched their own planes, racing to find the Japanese fleet. Enterprise launched a mixed strike of dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighter escorts. What followed was chaos. Poor communication, navigation errors, and bad luck caused many American squadrons to miss their targets or arrive separately. Enterprise's torpedo bombers, flying slow and low, attacked without proper fighter cover. They were slaughtered, but their sacrifice was not in vain. As Japanese fighters focused on the torpedo planes at low altitude, the skies above the Japanese carriers were left dangerously unguarded. At approximately 10:22 a.m., dive bombers from USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown arrived over the Japanese fleet. In a matter of minutes, history changed. Enterprise dive bombers, led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, attacked Kaga and Akagi. Bombs slammed into flight decks crowded with fueled aircraft and armed munitions. Explosions and fires erupted instantly. Kaga was mortally wounded. Akagi was doomed. Within minutes, two of Japan's most powerful carriers were out of action. Later that day, a third carrier, Soryu, was destroyed. The Japanese managed to strike back, heavily damaging USS Yorktown, which was eventually sunk by a submarine. But by the end of June 4th, three Japanese carriers were gone. The fourth, Hiryu, would be sunk the following day. The Battle of Midway was a decisive American victory. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, hundreds of experienced pilots and aircrew. These losses could never be fully replaced. USS Enterprise emerged from the battle undamaged. More importantly, she emerged as a proven instrument of victory. Midway marked the turning point of the Pacific War. From this point forward, Japan would fight largely on the defensive. But the war was far from over. In August 1942, the United States launched its first major offensive operation of the war, the invasion of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. The goal was to seize a Japanese airfield under construction and prevent Japan from threatening supply routes between the United States and Australia. USS Enterprise was once again at the center of events. The waters around Guadalcanal became known as Iron Bottom Sound due to the number of ships sunk there. Carrier battles, surface engagements, and air raids occurred almost daily. Enterprise operated under constant threat from Japanese aircraft, submarines, and surface forces. On August 24, 1942, Enterprise took part in the Battle of the Eastern Solomons. American aircraft struck the Japanese light carrier Ryujo, sinking her. But the Japanese struck back. Enterprise was hit by 3 bombs during air attacks. The explosions killed dozens of crew members and caused serious damage to the flight deck. Fires broke out. Despite the damage, Enterprise remained operational. Repairs were made at sea. Within hours, she was launching aircraft again. Just weeks later, on October 26, 1942, Enterprise fought in the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. This battle was brutal. Japanese aircraft focused heavily on Enterprise, knowing her reputation and importance. Enterprise was hit by 2 bombs, causing further damage and casualties. USS Hornet was attacked relentlessly and eventually sunk. For a time, USS Enterprise was the only operational American fleet carrier in the Pacific. The Japanese believed they had finally destroyed her. Tokyo Radio announced her sinking. But they were wrong. American repair crews worked day and night. Enterprise steamed to Noumea and then to Pearl Harbor for repairs. Even while damaged, she continued to operate aircraft when possible. Her survival became legendary. Japanese pilots would later report attacking a carrier they believed to be Enterprise, only to encounter her again weeks later. This led to the nickname, the Grey Ghost. By November 1942, Enterprise returned to the fight. She supported naval operations around Guadalcanal, providing air cover and striking Japanese shipping. As the campaign dragged on, Japanese losses mounted. In February 1943, Japanese forces evacuated Guadalcanal. It was their first major land defeat of the war. USS Enterprise had played a critical role in making that defeat possible. Throughout 1943, Enterprise continued to operate across the Pacific. She supported operations in the Central Pacific, the Gilbert Islands, the Marshall Islands. Her air group struck enemy airfields, ships, and installations. She escorted amphibious landings and protected invasion forces. As the war evolved, so did Enterprise. Her anti-aircraft defenses were significantly upgraded. Radar systems were improved. New aircraft replaced older models. The carrier that had entered the war in 1941 was no longer the same ship. She was more lethal, more resilient, and more experienced. By late 1943, the United States Navy had begun to gain overwhelming industrial superiority. New carriers were entering service. Enterprise was no longer alone, but she remained one of the most respected and battle-hardened ships in the fleet. Her crew understood that every mission could be their last. They had seen friends killed. They had seen ships burn and sink. And yet Enterprise continued forward. As 1944 approached, the war would escalate again. The battles would grow larger. The enemy would grow more desperate. A new threat, kamikaze attacks, would soon emerge. USS Enterprise would face her most dangerous enemy yet. And once again, history would test whether the ship that refused to die could survive. USS Enterprise, CV-6, Kamikaze War, Victory, and the End of a Legend. By 1944, the war in the Pacific had entered a new and far more violent phase. The United States Navy was advancing steadily westward, island by island, closing the distance to Japan itself. With every defeat, Japanese options narrowed. Fuel shortages worsened. Pilot training programs collapsed. Experienced air crews were nearly gone. Out of this desperation came a new and terrifying weapon. Kamikaze attacks. USS Enterprise would face them head-on. In early 1944, Enterprise joined the growing force of fast carrier task groups striking deep into Japanese-held territory. She supported operations in the Marshall Islands, providing air cover and delivering devastating strikes against enemy airfields and shipping. By this point, Enterprise had been upgraded extensively. She now carried newer aircraft, including F-6F Hellcat fighters, SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers, TBF and TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. Her anti-aircraft armament had been strengthened significantly, reflecting the increasing threat from enemy aircraft. Enterprise was no longer just a carrier. She was a floating fortress. In June 1944, Enterprise took part in one of the largest naval battles in history, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. This battle would later be known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Japanese committed nearly all of their remaining carrier-based aircraft in a desperate attempt to stop the American invasion of the Mariana Islands. Enterprise's air group launched wave after wave of fighters and bombers. What followed was catastrophic for Japan. American pilots, flying superior aircraft and benefiting from radar-directed control, destroyed hundreds of Japanese planes. Japanese carrier aviation was effectively annihilated. Enterprise once again emerged unscathed. Japan would never again mount a serious carrier-based air threat. As American forces advanced toward the Philippines, Enterprise remained on the front line. In October 1944, she participated in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle ever fought. This massive engagement consisted of multiple battles across hundreds of miles of ocean. Enterprise's aircraft attacked Japanese warships, transports and airfields, contributing to the near-total destruction of Japan's remaining naval power. But victory came at a price. This was the moment when kamikaze attacks became widespread. On November 24, 1944, USS Enterprise was struck by a kamikaze aircraft. The plane crashed into her flight deck, detonating explosives and fuel. The explosion tore through the deck, killing crew members and starting fires. Once again, damage control teams rushed into action. Once again, Enterprise survived. Repairs were completed, and she returned to combat, but the danger was increasing. By early 1945, Enterprise was supporting operations against Iwo Jima and later Okinawa, the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. Japanese kamikaze attacks intensified dramatically. On April 11, 1945, Enterprise was struck by another kamikaze. This attack was more devastating. The explosion damaged her forward elevator and caused heavy casualties. Enterprise was forced to withdraw for repairs at Pearl Harbor. For the first time in years, she was temporarily removed from the front lines. Even in repair, Enterprise continued to serve. She was converted into the first night carrier of the U.S. Navy, designated CV-6. Her aircraft were specially trained and equipped to conduct night operations, intercepting enemy aircraft and launching strikes after dark. This innovation significantly improved fleet defense during nighttime hours, a period previously vulnerable to attack. Enterprise returned to action in July 1945, participating in strikes against the Japanese home islands. Her aircraft attacked airfields, factories, and infrastructure. Japan was being crushed from the air. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced its surrender. World War II was over. USS Enterprise was present in the Pacific when the guns fell silent. She had fought from the earliest days of the war to its final weeks. Her record was unmatched. By the end of the war, USS Enterprise had earned 20 battle stars, more than any other U.S. warship of World War II. A Presidential Unit citation for extraordinary heroism. She had participated in nearly every major naval campaign of the Pacific War. She had been bombed repeatedly. She had been hit by kamikazes. She had been declared sunk multiple times by the enemy, yet she survived. After the war, Enterprise returned to the United States. She took part in Operation Magic Carpet, helping bring thousands of American servicemen home. But the world had changed. Newer, larger aircraft carriers were entering service. Jet aircraft required bigger decks and more advanced systems. Enterprise, despite her legendary status, was becoming obsolete. There were efforts to preserve USS Enterprise as a museum ship. Veterans, historians, and citizens campaigned to save her. But funding was insufficient. The Navy lacked the resources to maintain such a large vessel without operational value. In 1958, USS Enterprise was sold for scrap. The ship that had survived the war did not survive peace, yet her legacy endured. Her name would live on. In 1961, a new aircraft carrier was commissioned. USS Enterprise, CV-65, the world's first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. She carried the spirit of the Big E into a new era. USS Enterprise, CV-6, was more than steel and machinery. She was courage under fire. She was resilience against overwhelming odds. She was proof that determination, skill, and sacrifice could change the course of history. For those who served aboard her, she was home. For her enemies, she was a nightmare. And for history, she remains one of the greatest warships ever to sail. Thank you for joining this exploration of USS Enterprise CV-6 profound story. If you found this narrative enlightening, we invite you to like the video, share your insights in the comments, and subscribe for more historical explorations. Your continued support allows us to shed light on the grand narratives of our shared past. Until we meet again.